Welcome to Why the Long Face? Two old friends lifting the lid on mental health over a beer with author and psychiatrist Paul Keedwell and business consultant and so-called comedian Ollie Turnbull.
Welcome everyone. This is our remote special. We'll probably talk over each other and...
I've hardly said anything. So why are we remote, Uncle?
Because we are social distancing.
We are social distancing.
We are social distancing. So we thought, what better way to kick off episode 1 of season 3? Is it season 3, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, it's either season 3 or it's a special series of podcasts called Why the Long Pandemic.
Series 3, the coronavirus special. A legitimate opportunity to confront the psychological challenges surrounding the coronavirus pandemic that we are facing right now, which is causing a lot of fear and feelings of helplessness, I think, in most of the population, perhaps except for Donald Trump. So we've been sort of tracking the timeline of the cases. It's quite anxiety-provoking, and also, sadly as well, the increase in the number of deaths associated with the infection. And I was thinking also there's a psychological timeline here, because I think only 2 weeks ago I was thinking my mates are overreacting by cancelling our weekend away in Wales, which would have happened this weekend, in fact. How quickly my psychological timeline has developed in going from denial to, whoa, hold on a minute.
Well, yeah, no, exactly right. I mean, I don't know, I've hinted before, but I'm definitely an anxious person, and to the point where I've probably got into the area of clinical anxiety at some point, which has sort of affected my life. So you'd expect me to be completely anxious. It manifested with me is a almost manic desire to look at the data and to analyze the data and to see where we were as the UK relative to the rest of the world. It's very funny how your focus
I'm doing that
in
now.
the face of a global crisis like that turns to your own land rather selfishly. Not nationalistically, but you think, well, I'm concentrating my efforts on thinking about how little old Blighty is doing, worrying terribly about people in China, Italy, Spain, other countries, but focusing particularly on the UK rather selfishly. And I've had ups and downs, when the numbers have gone up and numbers have gone down, despite knowing that one data point, one day's worth of data means nothing.
I think, to be fair to you, it's less about how well you're doing in a kind of Yahoo way compared to other nations. It's a case of you hoping that the curve of increased cases and deaths is not going to mirror some of the worst affected nations out there, because you're thinking about the welfare of yourself and your family, right? I think that's fair.
Yeah, but it's my family and my fellow islanders from this little island that we sit on. As well. And it's funny. Obviously, I think of my family first, and then I think of the UK, and then I think of the rest of the world. I'm sometimes a little bit guilty of being like that, but I think most people are. I think if you looked at the news in Sweden, say, it would be dominated by the amount of cases in Sweden, the amount of deaths in Sweden. And it's funny how we collect around our national identity. At least that's what I think I found.
I think psychologically, I'm still in that space where I'm hoping that we are going to squash the curve, just on the sombrero, as it were, sooner rather than later. But I think the scientist in me thinks actually this is going to be a very anxious next couple of weeks for us.
I think so.
The death rates are accelerating, and they're going to continue to accelerate for a while, because we only really locked down properly with regard to our social distancing a week ago. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
About a week ago.
It's Sunday night. We sat around the telly, me and my daughter and my wife, and I said to my daughter, "This is a historic moment. Remember it." And she's 15, so she'll be. It's telling your grandchildren thing. By the way, I liked. I think you had the idea when you came to the sombrero shape of the graph. Did you not have the idea of us all going around wearing sombreros
that are 2 meters wide?
2 meter rim. Perfect.
Yeah.
So as soon as or actually, think about it, a 1 meter rim would do it, wouldn't it?
You want a 2 meter radius, actually, don't you? You want a 4 meter wide brim on the hat to be sure.
I don't think so. I think it's 1 meter because everybody's got one on. So you'll tap into someone else's sombrero.
Oh, right. Oh, if you're
Yeah.
assuming everyone's wearing them, yeah, that's all you need is a 2 meter wide one, a 1 meter radius. Correct.
If everybody's wearing them.
If everyone's wearing them, a 1 meter radius, you can't rely on that, man. I think you've got to have a 2 meter radius just to be sure. Brilliant idea, though. It's a fantastic idea.
These are the discussions Michael Gove and Boris Johnson are having.
Yeah. One of the really good ways to make sure people keep their distance is to wear a face mask. It's almost like a keep your distance thing, keep back, and it sort of works as a psychological strategy there.
Yeah, my theory is this, is that we're all at a heightened state of anxiety, and when any animal, and I've been looking at my daughter's pony, when any animal is in a heightened state of anxiety, they're constantly looking around for things that are unusual and weird. And there's no two ways about it. Someone in a face mask looks a bit weird. Puts you slightly on edge.
Well, it's disconcerting to see anyone covering their face in any way, which is
exactly
why we don't like people wearing hoodies, wearing their hoods up. We don't like people wearing masks of any kind, really.
I've got a question, Alex, and I'm wondering because, and this is based slightly on personal experience. I'm wondering whether this. Let's call it a period of heightened national anxiety. It's actually global anxiety, but let's call it a period of heightened national anxiety.
Yeah.
Do you think the naturally anxious person, even someone who's gone into a clinical level of anxiety and depression, can use some of the things that has helped them to get out of that crisis in this crisis, and can also help others?
Yeah. So you've got a lot of fellow travellers, all. As someone who experiences a lot of generalized anxiety, which is, well, we call it free floating anxiety, don't we? Which can just sort of rest on any issue. You have perhaps a higher propensity than the average person to worry, and then that affects all the other components of anxiety, all the sort of somatic, physical manifestations as well, haven't you?
Definitely, yeah. That's a really good point. So there's two things, isn't there, really? One is the troublesome, unhelpful thoughts, the cognitive distortions and other things. And then the other is being confused by the physical manifestations of your fear.
Which can then feed into an increase in worry and go in that vicious cycle.
And it might be the case that there are people who have a lower level that will tip them into an anxious state, who are being pushed into that anxious state because of the sort of the chronic nature of it. I mean, this crisis isn't going to last forever. I think we're sure about that, but it's lasting long enough for people to be have their anxiety aroused, if you like, longer than is natural, and that might lead to uncomfortable feelings. It might lead to loss of sleep, loss of appetite, and things that they're not used to, because everybody almost on the planet now is in that state.
Well, not everyone. You say that, but I think it depends where you are on the curve. The curve that we were talking about earlier of cases.
Oh yeah, the curve.
I think there's a much more heightened sense of anxiety in Spain right now, or Italy, than there is in the UK, but it's coming for the UK, I think, in the next week or so. And you could argue it's already there in New York, but it's not there in some of the mid-states of America, right? Because it just really depends how badly your region's affected right now. But I think it is coming on down the line. So I think it's helpful for us then to chat about strategies people use to reduce anxiety, given that a lot of us are going to be feeling anxious.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I just want to pick up on one of the points you said about regional variations. I think you're right. I'm already picking up people. My hometown is Ilkley in West Yorkshire, and I'm already hearing little murmurs of people saying it's not affecting us that much. It's only affecting the areas that are very populated. So there's a particular area of Italy, of course, that was affected, particular
Lombardy.
area of China, Lombardy, that's right, and China in Wuhan, and in America it seems to be New York, and of course with us it's London. And I think you're right. I think that might grow. That why do we have to be locked down because it's not affecting us too badly? And that'll be an interesting challenge for the government to have national rules and yet have regional people saying, "Hey,
I think that is challenging." Yeah.
But you're right. Let's talk about coping strategies then.
Yeah. So what I think is important to start with is to realize that you're anxious. So let's think about what are the manifestations of anxiety, apart from just the the thoughts that you've got around the virus and getting infected, and your fears for your loved ones. How does anxiety manifest itself? So I think there's the physical manifestation, and there's the behavioural as well, isn't there? Constantly perhaps looking at statistics and probably tuning into 24-hour news, talk radio, and that sort of thing is probably a manifestation of a fixation on this fear, right?
Yeah, and there's an interesting point here, is that to a certain extent it's justified. I mean, it's not quite an existential crisis for humanity, but it's, the biggest news story of maybe since the Second World War, in a sense. So
it's going to perpetuate the anxiety, isn't it? But it's a natural response, I think, to the anxiety to want to do that, because you're constantly vigilant, like with any anxiety, for more information that can help, that might actually be reassuring. You're perhaps even trying to search for evidence that this curve isn't going to accelerate. Maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's a classic thing with any kind of anxiety disorder, isn't it? Looking for reassurance.
Exactly, and forgetting that constant rumination and looking for assurance, even if you get it, you still need more, and that's exhausting in itself, and can feed the anxiety.
That's it. So better. So in the same way as if you have obsessive compulsive disorder, which is another form of anxiety disorder, really, it's fueled by anxiety, is the idea that if you do these mental or physical rituals like hand washing, which we're all doing at the moment, of course. We're all becoming a bit OCD, that in some way will relieve the anxiety, but it never does. And in fact, the only way to beat the anxiety is to stop those rituals and face the increased anxiety that you might experience in the short term by doing that, but then use other techniques to surf out and learn to master that anxiety, because the rituals we know they don't help.
No.
And in the same way, tuning into the radio and tuning into 24-hour news is not helping. And it's better to stop doing that altogether. I think that's like strategy number one.
Well, even I'm doing that. That's right. I'm rationing the bad news. And also I'm being selective about what news I consider to be relevant.
Okay.
So to me, it's the number of deaths reported by country by day, because the number of cases reported is distorted by the fact that some countries aren't testing and some are testing a lot. So, but the number of deaths seems to me to be a number that can't be fudged. And I actually have to graph out the numbers sometimes, just so that I see how we compare with other nations and can make some kind of projection as a very, very amateur statistician.
Well, I think you and I have both been doing that as a way of trying to reassure ourselves that that things are not increasing too exponentially, but unfortunately, I think we're getting into that exponential part of the graph now. Okay, so we're not saying that we shouldn't check the stats, I suppose, but actually, are we in a position to change the situation? We're not really.
Well, it comes back to the Pilgrim's Prayer, doesn't it? Give me the the fortitude to bear the things I can't change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Right. And I suppose, other than to put pressure on our political masters, as it were, there isn't much we can do once the die is cast, if you like. Once the virus is in the community, it's going to feed through the community. The best thing we can do, obviously, stay at home and follow the guidance. But given that, and given that we are going to experience, as you say, a certain level of understandable anxiety, given the situation, and given that we're fairly helpless to change the situation, what do we do about it? Now, I've thought about some fairly standard things. You said it would work in anyone with an anxiety disorder. Probably the most obvious one is relaxation, right? Relaxation techniques.
Yep, nice.
Yeah, so I think these work, whatever the cause of your anxiety. They are tried and tested. And the one I think that works the best, that I've used from time to time, especially when I've found it difficult to get off to sleep at night, is controlled breathing, controlling your breathing. I think it's critical.
It's so simple as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very, very simple technique. First of all, find yourself somewhere comfortable to sit down, or sofa, or you might be in bed. And then some people suggest putting your hand on your tummy to monitor your breathing rate, because obviously your tummy will it'll go in and out depending on your breathing. Okay, and then maybe try to focus on then to count in your head during the inspiration. You can count up to 4, and then when you breathe out, you try and make it last a little bit longer. So you count to 5. And if you just focus on the counting, that helps, because if you don't do that, you can revert back to all those worries that were in your head when you first sat down. But you'll be amazed at how soon that reduces all the physical manifestations of anxiety, and that in turn will hopefully make you feel more in control.
Yeah. So I thought this was nonsense, because I thought, how can something so simple help me? My mind is an absolute mess at the moment of ridiculous thoughts. And you're absolutely right. You've got to believe in it. You've got to stick with it. You've got to do it properly. But because a lot of the physical manifestation is misguided fight, flight, or freeze responses from your primitive brain, actually doing something like breathing in and out can do nothing but calm you down. And also you can, if you're lucky, take your mind off the constant machinations, because what you're doing is you're forcing yourself to think about something relatively simple, i.e. breathe air coming into your body and coming out of your body. It is quite surprising, but you've got to do it. You've got to be quite committed to it and not think, oh, this is bollocks, and give up really quickly, I think.
Well, I mean, what we're doing most of the time when we're anxious is we're breathing too quickly. And that means that we're blowing off a lot of CO2, more than we would do normally. And the consequence of that is that we get a lot more of the symptoms that you would associate with a fight or flight, or the of anxiety, which is the feeling hot, the pins and needles,
dizzy,
feeling dizzy, and also muscular tension gets worse as well. So when you slow that breathing down, all those symptoms can subside, and you can start to feel a little bit more in control of your emotions. And the other thing you can do while you're controlling your breathing is consider which part of your muscles, which part of your body is tense, where perhaps you're feeling it across the shoulders, or perhaps you're feeling it in the legs, perhaps you're clenching your thighs, perhaps your calves, and think about where those areas of tension are, and train your mind on those, and consider progressively trying to relax those muscle groups. You might find that all your body is kind of tense and rigid. So perhaps start from, the feet, even the toes, and then progressively try to relax, and then to your calves and so on, and move up the body to the thighs, and then the abdomen, and through to the upper limbs as well, and try to progressively relax all the muscles in your body.
It's a well-known thing, isn't it? The what's interesting. Sorry to interrupt, but what is interesting? I know this technique has been around since about the 1930s. But what interests me is I've studied a little bit of Eastern philosophy and Indian philosophy, and they have a technique for meditation. Very, very easy meditation. Obviously, that the professionals take it a lot further, and it is amazing how simple the techniques for meditation are to what you've just been describing. It's amazing how much parallel there is in terms of the relaxation of the muscle groups, in terms of the concentration of the breathing. And there are also things that we call mindfulness these days, I think, which is really, really focusing and concentrating on what the senses are telling you about this moment in time. The ears, the eyes, particularly. It's really interesting how close they are. Yeah.
So the mindfulness is an adapted form of Buddhist meditation. All forms of meditation really are. They all help with anxiety. It's important to say that. Using the technique of focused attention, you're narrowing it right down.
Right.
One of my old mentors, Philip Snaith, used to have a technique called auto-hypnosis, where you would just look at the back of your hand and you consider all the variations, the shapes of the veins and where they're running, the contours of the knuckles and so on and so forth. And First of all, he'd guide you through it. He'd say, look, this is what now, look at the nail beds and all this sort of thing. And you'd be looking into detail at the back of your hand. Before you knew it, you were in this sort of trance-like state, which is what you're attempting to get into with all these techniques. And in yoga as well, in yoga classes, in that circumstance, it's about really thinking about your posture and really focusing in on that. But all these techniques are perhaps helping you to take your mind away from pressing issues, if you like.
That cluttered, never stopping voice, which is inside your head, saying good things, saying negative things. I've forgotten what the word for it is, but they actually have a word for it. Actually, putting a label on it gives you some comfort, because it's like that thing that keeps chattering inside your head that everybody has, that is useful to you, but you have to control in some way and not be a slave.
It's a kind of nagging inner voice, isn't it? It might be saying right now, there's a good chance of you ending up on a respirator, or there's a good chance of you dying of coronavirus. Worries are not necessarily realistic. They're just the worst thing that can happen, aren't they? And they can invade your
which we call catastrophizing, which I can't pronounce.
Yeah.
But catastrophizing.
Catastrophizing. With mindfulness, you're actually saying, I'm going to hold that thought, but I'm putting it straight to one side. I'm not ignoring it, but I'm putting it in a box, because it's only one part of me. Because I'm aware of everything else that's going on in my sensorium. I've slowed my breathing. I've relaxed my muscles. I'm okay. I'm in control, and I'm able to have a metacognition, a meta thought, which is looking outside and into that thought and thinking that thought is just a thought. It's not reality.
I love these metacognitions.
Yeah.
It's a bit freaky in some way, because metacognition, you're thinking about thinking.
Thinking about the thought.
What does that
mean? Yeah. And we do have the capacity to do that, which is extraordinary. The mind is a wonderful thing. But yeah, to be able to put that thought in a little box is really great. I mean, the mind is incredibly susceptible to anxiety, but it's also that smoke alarm principle, isn't it? Of that's aided our survival over the millennia. Better to overreact than underreact to a threat. So we tend to overreact, perhaps over exaggerate the chance of us dying from this virus. If I play things right, then chances are I'm not going to get it. But even if I were to get it, my risk of dying is slim.
But it worked so well in the past, right? You and me are running through the bush. We stop. I go, I don't like the sound of that rustle in the bush. I'm out of here. You go, oh, for God's sake, he's always so uptight. You're ripped to pieces, blood everywhere. And I go back, and I not only do I fertilize my wife, I fertilize your wife as well. But not very helpful in the modern world, where there's so much stimulus and shit going on and so much news, whereby we're triggered.
We're triggered on a daily basis.
Constant time. And so not only are we constantly we keep having things that trigger us, but it's a constant stream. And we all know that constant anxiety, as opposed to small bursts of really intense anxiety, very bad for your long-term mental health, correct?
Yep, absolutely.
And so it's and this is a particularly chronic situation. I would literally wake up every morning and have a look at the death toll from the night before. Not healthy. So I'm trying to stop myself doing that.
Yeah, and stick to what you know you can control, which is your immediate environment. If you are going to mostly isolate yourself physically from others in order to minimize your risk of getting this, and apart from that, you're just going to try to get on with your life. And then that's the next thing, which is adapting to change, I guess, in terms of how you adapt to a change in your working routine and how you adapt to the fact that you're going to have to socialize remotely, I guess, through technology. But hey, I've found that the more I do that, the better I feel. Don't know about you. The more I do this sort of thing, which is chinwag with you over the internet, the better I feel.
No, absolutely the same. And there's another thing I'd like to point out, and that is how we are starting to really quickly make best use of this comms tech, right? So I use it all the time for teleconferences, because some of the projects I work on are global, and we had one in New Zealand for the last 6 months, for example. So I'm used to these. But I've used tech in a lot of different ways since
Yeah.
being isolated at home.
Yeah.
One is professionally. So
Yeah.
I've been able to run workshops really, really effectively using
Right.
whiteboards, which are documents that everybody can access and edit at the same time, and really sort of top-notch, high bandwidth video conferencing. But the second thing that I've done, which is in private life, you were involved as well, is one of our friends had his 50th. And so he just had a massive
Yeah.
teleconference and we shared some photos. And I've done some other smaller groups with 2 couples and my wife. And I have to say, the smaller groups work quite well. And you just stick a webcam on and you're having a little drink. And it's almost the same, but not quite the same as being with your friends. But it means, we're all in the same boat. You've just remembered how funny one of your friends is or how interesting one of your friends is and how different it's affecting their life. And like you said, it really, really helps. And just this podcast is lifting my mood.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking some things are better than they were before this pandemic. Actually, holding on to those things and being grateful for them is another way of coping. Let's not focus on all the things that are restrictive. Let's think about the things that are positive. I can think of one straight away, which is, okay, not everyone has a garden, but I've got a garden that's been a bit neglected, and I'm getting out there and I'm sorting it out, and I'm finding that really therapeutic. Not only is it good mentally, it's good for my physical fitness, which is a consequence that I didn't really anticipate before. We talked before about the biophilia hypothesis and how getting out in nature is helpful. I'm also loving the fact that if I go for a short run, I hardly see a soul and it's really peaceful.
Yeah, it's funny.
That's a real bonus. I'm hearing way more wildlife. I'm seeing way more wildlife.
Really?
Yeah, it's making you realize the effect that normal busy human activity has on suppressing the activity of particularly bird life. I've heard much more bird song. Never noticed so many birds in my garden before. But anyway, now there are anecdotes coming from San Francisco of coyotes prowling the streets and flamingos being spotted on the beaches of Spain. I mean, it's so much nicer at night. I think I'm sleeping better because it's quieter. There's less street noise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I tell you what, though, when we got locked down, I had this very strong urge. It goes back to what we were talking about before about your immediate family, and then your nation, and then your species. I suppose there's something in the middle, which is your friends. And I wanted to see my son who's at university. I just wanted him to be home. I just wanted him to be here within eyesight.
Right.
I know he's not at risk. He's obviously in his early 20s, so he's very low risk of serious illness, but
much more likely that he'd pass it on to you, and the illness in your body is a very different illness, my friend.
It certainly is. My feeble old overweight unhealthy body, it's have an absolute bloody field day.
Yeah ventilator for sure.
If we're talking about generations, I do find the older generation having a slightly different attitude towards it. I know my father, for example, says things like, well, I don't mind if I die. I'm just worried about your mother. And we, in the week, we had a breakthrough with father-in-law. He came round to walk in our garden and he said, slightly underwhelmingly, I won't come any nearer because of that bug that's going round. So he'd understood that there was an issue, but, it just took it.
But you were thinking... but you shouldn't actually be outdoors. What are you doing here? Why are you here at all? Go back home.
Believe me, it was a breakthrough.
Yeah. Most people get the message now, aren't they?
I think so. I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And our bloody survived the war and the Blitz. Actually, there's a few of those still.
Yeah, there is a bit of that, and then there's my father has this pride thing where he should be in charge and looking after mother, and yet he's got poor lungs, so it's probably better for him to stay in and let her go shopping. And I had to explain to him that it's not just about you getting ill, Dad, and Prater thought dying, which at 92 he doesn't feel as a tragedy. It's about you taking resources off the community by being ill, and he bless him, he understood that, and he took that very much into account. The other thing I worry about, of course, is our friends in the NHS. I mean, our literal friends, but also anyone in the NHS who is worthy of praise at any time, particularly now. Do you worry for the stress, the level of responsibility, the long hours, and the constant seeing of even more death than they're used to. Does that worry you regarding the mental health of our healthcare professionals, doctors, nurses, support staff, management?
Oh, and there's no doubt that they're under more stress than the general population. I mean, they're just as frightened as anybody else of contracting it themselves, of course, but they're also got the added stress of this acceleration of the number of cases being admitted to hospital at the moment, and there being not really adequate resources at this moment in time in the UK to deal with them.
Yeah.
Added to the fact that they feel exposed because we are being issued with, in direct contact with someone with symptoms, a flimsy plastic apron and a poor quality and poor fitting surgical mask and some gloves that don't really go above the wrist and no visors. I mean, that will change hopefully soon. One thing that will protect them a bit, I guess, is the camaraderie that builds up amongst fellow clinicians who are, of course, working in teams and supporting each other to a degree in that way.
Yeah, I dig that.
Yeah,
it'd be really stressful. But you're right. They've got this camaraderie. They're sort of in a war. Very strong chance of getting through it, and the nation couldn't be more behind them. That thing that happened at 8 o'clock the other night, where people out on the streets applauding.
it was
sounds
great.
silly, but I understand in many areas it was quite moving. It's probably worth pointing out actually that when we're recording this, because the news and the status changes so quickly, it's probably going to be out of date. So where are we?
We're 28th of March. We've had the biggest increase in the number of deaths in 24 hours today. 250 odd.
Grim. And we've just gone through the 1,000 deaths mark.
So it is getting serious, and I think it's going to get tougher over the next week or two. And then hopefully we'll start to flatten the curve because of the new policies that we've introduced. A lot of people are arguing that they should have been introduced earlier, and I think perhaps the reckoning will come later on down the line, but now's not the time. Now's the time to, as you say, support our frontline staff as much as we can, and the people that are self-isolating, particularly the elderly, particularly if they're not as well up on use of technology as we are, right? Because we were just saying how we're adapting video links, virtual pubs, that kind of thing. I worry about our elderly who are lonely at the best of times. Maybe give them a call more often than you would normally.
Absolutely. And there's been lots of that. I'm part of a Facebook group for the local Medway area where I live, and just messages come through. I've got this. It was great. Just this morning, I've got 72 eggs.
Can't get eggs for love nor money in Stockwell. There's a black market in them. No eggs in this house.
Oh, right.
It's very scarce around here.
Well, listen, my friend, I've got about two of the things off my list talked about. So I think we should maybe do a few of these every day, every couple of days or something, and just pump them out. Do you fancy?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea, and also we can maybe mention strategies that other people have used, things they've done to brighten up their day and make living in this era of pandemic more acceptable. But also we can perhaps have a little bit more of a think about how this is going to change our ways of life in the long term, because I think there will be some long-term changes, maybe for the better.
I'm hoping.
I've got a feeling that the me culture, the narcissistic culture, that might become a little less fashionable going forward, which can't be a bad thing.
Yeah, and the expense, the risk of being called a horrible old boomer, maybe the super wokes, who can be a little bit irritating in their self-righteousness.
Right.
Maybe in the face of a real proper triggering crisis, which we're all rallying together. I don't know.
I was thinking about this in regard to attitude towards experts, actually. People on the hard right mistrust experts and professors, people who we're really relying on now, the epidemiologists and the people who hopefully are going to be producing the vaccines and doing the speeding through the research on antiretroviral drugs and things. We're all suddenly thinking, yeah, actually we need these people. But I think the hard right had a suspicion of experts because they suspected they were a little bit too right on and a bit too pinkos, basically. And then you had the hard left were just as bad in that they didn't like the idea of a hierarchy, which is ludicrous because, of course, there are going to be people who know more than you. who've dedicated their lives to researching this sort of thing, who have spent a career studying viruses. Of course. So I think experts are going to come back into fashion, thank God, because it's going to lead to better policy making, better decision making going forward. We didn't apply to the EU scheme for bulk buying ventilators, right? So we're at the back of the queue on that now. I think it's just a prime example, whatever you think of the EU and the way it operates, it's a prime example of how multinational, international cooperation is increasingly important in this world, whether it be for fighting pandemics, fighting refugee crises, fighting economic crises. The more we all work together, the better it's going to be for our well-being. You know, because the trend has been to go more nationalistic and fighting against globalization, but actually faced with a pandemic where we've all got a joint responsibility for all our welfare, nationalism might become less fashionable as well. I hope so, myself.
It's interesting. I mean, I was talking before about how you think of your family, then your friendship circle, then your country, then the world. But I'm still hopeful, and I'm very, very hopeful of, like you say, expertise coming back into fashion. What I am not looking forward to is what's going to happen in a few months' time when it's calming down and we've survived, and there's been thousands of individual tragedies, but nations have survived. Is the looking back and the 2020 vision and this mistake and we should have done, and that argument is going to spiral based on what people's entrenchant sometimes political stances, and I think that might be quite tedious.
Maybe. I think it's going to stick around, this virus, so we will need to make some more long-term changes, but hopefully not as draconian as the ones, I'm sure not as draconian as the ones we're having to deal with now.
Oh, definitely. And when it's proved that a virus like this, the herd immunity thing is not the thing to do, then we'll be a little bit more like South Korea, like Singapore, and we'll have our sort of feelers out. And as soon as these things happen, we'll do short, sharp, semi-draconian lockdown.
We'll flatten the curve. We'll get to a point where a certain percentage, but probably not the majority of people have had it. And then we'll relieve ourselves from some of the restrictions. And then I think there'll be a bit of a delay, and then another little peak, and then we'll have to have a few restrictions again, and it'll go on like that for a while until we've got a vaccine in place. That's my prediction.
Well, that's certainly enough for one night. It was great.
Do get in touch with us on social medias. Let us know what strategies you found to help you with your anxiety. Right? Oh,
absolutely, 100%. And we're available on Twitter, WHYTLF. Email hi@ytlf.com. People use that quite a lot, actually. And then Facebook, which is Why the Long Face, and our website, ytlf.com. And we will see you probably before, just in a couple of days, maybe. What do you think? Doctor?
We'll see how it goes. Yeah.
Stay safe.
Stay safe.